So welcome back everyone to episode 9, I think we're at, of Pat's Uncovered, a podcast where we kind of go through the uncharted territories of untraditional pathways into tech. And I've got the fabulous GWENNY WARNICK with me today. I'm just so excited. I'm like, oh, and I say this to every guest in fairness, where I'm like, I'm so excited, but I am. Like, I mean, all of these are just amazing people who have done really, really cool things. So I'm really happy for you to be here today.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, it's very bright and early, and for most people that know me, it's hard for me to be awake in the morning, but these are the things that actually get me out of bed, so I'm like very happy we did this as early as we did. GWENNY, do you want to do a bit of an introduction to yourself, who you are, what you're doing, and how we ended up talking, I think?
Sure. So I am a cloud engineer at the moment, but I'm a career changer into tech from a couple of years back, so I'm still relatively new to the industry. I work in a really great startup called Mantle Group, and I was with them as a trainee as well before I got hired. And before that, I did my career change, and before that, I was in education, so totally unrelated kind of arts background. And before that, like back after uni, was music. So
didn't even know that extra part existed. Even better for the podcast. I mean, even more to talk about. It works out really well.
I forgot to say how I know you, sorry. From
you're good.
Women Who Code, I think I met you, although I feel like I've maybe seen you at events before, but you were running Women Who Code.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with Melbourne. Like, Melbourne tech is so small in terms of the community and stuff. You'll see the same people everywhere, so like realistically we just saw each other at other events, but I think Women Who Code was kind of where we're like, another person, okay, cool. And now we run it together and it's amazing. So get involved in the community, people. It works. It gets you friends like this. This is amazing. Right, okay, let's dive in. You mentioned a music career. Sorry, I didn't even know that part. Do you want to kind of go back into kind of maybe high school, college times? Like, what was going on back then? Like, this is all new territory to me to hear about, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I did. I have a music background, so I just always did music from when I was little. Like, my mum put me in a choir when I was like 6, but it was like a really hardcore choir where you read huge like scores of Bach masses and stuff and sing in all different languages. And I used to be in like the Lord Mayor's Christmas carols every year, like,
oh my God.
Like that. So I had that kind of, I feel like choir then got me, I just always liked music. So I played a lot of like instruments in school, and then that was the first degree I did, classical double bass. So I was an orchestral double bass player.
Oh, wow. Look at you go. And I mean, I actually didn't even know that was something you could do in college or as a degree. That's really cool.
Yeah, well, it's at like the Conservatorium of Music. So,
okay, yep.
But they're a uni as well, yeah.
Oh, okay. And then did you kind of stick with it for a while? Like, was that a professional career as well?
Yeah, a bit. So I always preferred rock music. So I was always in bands, and I did this kind of really cool world fusion group. If you're up in Brisbane, like, they're just awesome, called Zaza. And I liked playing all different styles of music. But yeah, I played as like a casual musician with the symphony orchestra up there. And then I moved overseas because eventually it was because I wanted to learn double bass. And if you go to the Czech Republic and you speak Czech fluently, you can just do uni for free. And my favourite composer was there. Yeah, cool, hey, like imagining that.
So wait, did you actually move to Czech Republic and go to uni?
Not uni. So I went there for a year, and that's where I learned to teach English, because you can do like your certificate in 4 weeks and then work.
Oh, so, cool, okay.
Yeah, that kind of started me teaching English. I'd taught music before that as well, but not like other subjects.
Yeah. So teaching was kind of always there as like something that you were constantly doing and developing skills in.
Yeah, I love helping people, and I've always loved, have always had that, I guess, as a bit of a place in things I've done. Yeah, like mentoring and stuff like that.
Oh my God, how was Czech Republic? It's like one of my favorite places. Like, I was there, I think, sometime in college for holidays, and I was like, easily, like, where were you there? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I was in Prague in Žižkov, if anyone knows there. It's like Prague 3 or Praha 3. And it was a really funny place. I remember there was like one of the oldest Jewish cemeteries like in the world at the back of my window. And it was this like sweet little cemetery with like kind of fallen over like stones. and it was behind a baby tower. So it's this like TV tower, but it's got giant crawling babies on it. I don't know if you remember it. It's
I don't think I remember that, but okay.
A famous sculptor did them. And it's just like wild. It's these huge babies crawling up a tower, like, you know, bigger than a car kind of size. So yeah, I lived there. I kind of learnt to teach, and I worked on pub crawls at night. So I was just using English all the time. I didn't learn Czech quickly. And yeah, the pub crawls are there. They're like loose as well, because you'd go to like a bar, and in between the next bar you stand on a bench and like you'd pour shots into people's mouth and stuff from a bottle. You'd have to like try not to get it all over their face. It's just like this would never go down in Australia. But yeah, it was awesome.
Eastern Europe is just a whole different scenario, isn't it? Like, I mean, that whole time was just wild. But really not. I mean, see, this is kind of why I love doing these things. I'm like, would have never seen that coming, and it would have been so hard to kind of like find that in just random conversation too for it to come up. So I'm like, I'm very glad I'm like picking it out. I'm like, this is great. Okay, cool. So that was a year you spent in Czech Republic.
Yeah, and it was financially really hard, and I actually always struggled managing money. Like, I've gotten a lot better at it, but I was just struggled with it. But I guess over there I wasn't making enough money, so it wasn't that. It was more that like I didn't have savings when I went. You have to work like 3-4 jobs to make enough money, because it's not unionized over there, teaching English, and you're treated really badly if you're new. So like exploited a lot. You kind of travel all over the city, you don't make very much money. Okay. So it's very hard to make enough to live.
Yep.
And then after a year, I just like couldn't afford it. And I think I borrowed money off my parents, and I went and worked in England for 3 weeks to pay for my flight home at like they have English kind of boarding schools. Like, I don't know, you would probably know of them. Yeah, they'd be in Scotland too. And yeah, that was actually really fun. It's just these kids going, I was like, what is this concept? And these kids turn up. It was King's College or something. Yeah. And they turn up at this huge English kind of manor house, and they're just there for 3 weeks. And it was like all these kids across from Spain for like their break or something.
Yeah.
And
oh, for God, yeah. Yeah. So it's a really big thing, like in Ireland too, where like in the summer they'd be there for like weeks and stuff to learn. They'd be there to learn kind of English and stuff. And you get on the bus, and then like whatever bus stop you're on the way into the city, and like 50 kids would get onto the bus, like all speaking Spanish. Like it was genuinely like a summer sound that is like known in Cork. I literally saw one of those like memes or whatever it was, like or TikToks or something the other day, where they're like, I can't wait for things to go back to normal, and these are the sounds of Cork we can hear again. And it really is a thing, like the Spanish students coming around. But God,
that's hilarious.
You hate it when it's happening, because you're sitting on a bus and it's just so loud. But like now I look back and I'm like, I would pay for that. I would literally pay to be on a bus like that right now.
Yeah, they're pretty it's pretty full on, like teaching kids. And we lost a guy. He had kind of he just was, I don't know if he was autistic or had a different, like a disability, I'm not sure, but he kind of didn't speak much. He couldn't communicate verbally often. Mm-hmm. And so we had put this card in this little chest, and I remember we lost him, and we found him with the nuns near Big Ben or something. Like, we had the police, we were looking all over the city, and he just somehow found his way to like the nunnery or whatever it is. And thankfully, like, they looked in his pocket, because he hadn't like shown them. They were like looking for ID. Oh, I'll never forget like the terror.
Oh my God, like, it's definitely one of the like scariest things of losing someone else's kid, and I don't think I've ever contemplated that as a fear of mine, but like it's definitely up there now. I don't know when I would have the opportunity to do that, and I don't really want it, but like terrifying. So you've worked there for 3 weeks, and you're flying home to Brisbane now. Is that what's happening next? So so are you just moving into full-time teaching English at home now?
Yeah, so I went back I stayed with my parents when I got back, and my mum worked in the library at UQ, the University of Queensland, which is one of the big like sandstone unis up there. It's beautiful, like grounds. It goes like purple in kind of, I don't know when it is exactly. I'm really bad with like seasons, but you get like a purple carpet from all the jacarandas, and it's just so pretty. But yeah, and that happens like all over the uni and all over the city. But anyway, I didn't think of working there. And for some reason in my mind, I remember thinking I would be doing other stuff. So I started the casual work again with the orchestra, but it's really sporadic and they sometimes call you like on the day or the day before. So in terms of me like making money to pay back my debt, like I couldn't just rely on that.
Yeah.
So I ended up, I don't know what I was doing first. I think I was just applying for jobs. And then mum was like, why don't you teach English at the uni? There's a school. And in my mind, I was like, why would I teach English in an English speaking country? Like it just seemed really like stupid. And I was like, there won't even be students. Like I look back, I just remember thinking it so like concretely and imagining there was no other reality. And then I was like, oh, it's like a whole industry here. It was like before COVID, it was Australia's third largest industry, I think, export.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I took her advice and went and applied for like, they had a big English teaching institute there and got the job there. I still remember as well walking in there and I'd done the like movie scene where you spill coffee all over like your top. I had like a yellow top and it was already like a bit see-through and I was just like, oh Jesus, this is like a nightmare. And I was so flustered because it's so hot there. But yeah, so ended up.
It's like, like the funniest thing is like this literally happened to me like 2 months ago when I was going to like the final round interview for the job.
You mentioning it. Yeah.
Literally, and I'm sitting on the bus and I've like got my coffee and I'm like sitting down, making sure I've got my mask on. Next second, I know there's coffee all over me and I'm like, no, like what is going on? Not right. And it's like, it was one of those things where I literally just had like my iPad, my phone with me, and that's all I brought with me. So I didn't even have anything I could like clean myself up. I was just like, oh no, is there another coffee shop I could go into to like clean myself? Oh, it was so awful. But yeah, it always just happens when you don't need it to, doesn't it? You're like,
yeah, it threw me.
Yeah, like it wouldn't happen to most other people, but yes, I don't expect any less from myself anymore.
Yeah, me too. I'm just like, oh.
Yeah,
whatever.
This is on brand for me now. Right, okay, so you're teaching English at the university and that, I'm assuming that's going well. Like that sounds like a pretty cool job.
Yeah, I love teaching. It can be really challenging as well. Like there's a lot of teachers, particularly in that industry you meet, that just constantly kind of complain about it and you're like, why are you even a teacher? And I loved the teaching part. So there were some things that were hard to manage. It's really tiring, like teaching 5 days a week, like exhausting. And I would always kind of pick up extra classes. So they would have things like students on AusAid scholarships. So from like Mozambique or Iraq or Vietnam, and they've been, the government has like a agreement where they'll support them to study their English and then their degree. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of picked up a lot of extra stuff, which was also really cool skills wise, because I feel like that's where I learned a lot of skills, like life skills and good job skills, like kind of having to plan things out in terms of having to communicate with other people, like team members or stakeholders. With students, particularly when it's like one-on-one or private, you need to kind of be showing them that they're learning and you need to be able to have a vision for them and like communicate that with them. And it took me kind of time to realize that. Yeah, but in Czech Republic, it's like all these business dudes and they're just so funny. They're so kind of stern but really like fun when you get to know them. And I had one that was just like obsessed with Australia and he'd bring me in articles and usually it was like fun ones where he'd be like, you know, Australia has the top 10 poisonous animals in the world. And he'd be like, look at this. And he'd put out this like magazine article. I'd be like, yeah. And they can kind of, some of them want to choose the topic they talk about and just chat because the business is paying for it. Yeah. But some of them are like really like, they need to know how they're improving and they get really like grumpy if they don't see progress. So it was, it was a good experience. And like, sorry.
No, like it's like even just that experience, like it literally just sounds like consulting to me, like where it's like one client is like, do what you want, we'll go with it, we'll see where it goes, and the others are like, where is my waterfall, like this happens and then this milestone and we need to hit this by this date. Like, it really does sound like that. Like I can see the comparison. Yeah, it's exactly right. I'd never thought of it. You're totally right. Like you were consulting before you even knew it. Right, like this is it.
I was. Two hilarious Czech men.
how long were you teaching English then, and where then did it kind of go, this isn't it for now?
Yeah, so I did still kind of do it even when I was career changing a bit. Yeah, it's something that's very flexible, teaching English. So you can kind of, when I was working in Melbourne, I would, if I had a different job during the day, like when I'd gotten into curriculum development, for example, sometimes I would also get asked to do classes at night or kind of one-on-one classes. Like I'd have a friend who had a friend that wanted to get PR and she needed to practice for an exam. That happened like quite a few times.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kept teaching for quite a long time. It was, I'm so, like, my memory's so rubbish, but...
There's no concept of time left anymore after the lockdown. You're completely fine.
Yep. Pause for like 10 minutes while I calculate. But I was in Brisbane for 4 years when I got back. Yep. No, I can do it. So that was 2008. And then I have been in Melbourne since 2012.
Okay.
And yeah, I taught like most of that time until about, it would be kind of 6 years ago when I got more into curriculum development, and I'd always kind of written my own materials. And also, like I was talking about those classes in Brisbane and the Czech Republic, because you're essentially creating your own kind of course for every student or your own curriculum. It's just a skill that I liked doing that.
Yeah.
Kind of like putting a recipe together for someone's like success. Yeah. Something that really appealed to me, like being able to help them say, that's how it feels to me. And everyone's got their own personal kind of one. And I really like finding that out, like what is going to help them, what motivates them. Because another thing with teaching English that I think is really useful to learn is there's a lot of evidence around and a lot of research around like learning theories and how people learn. Yeah. So you find out a lot about that. And there are things like, they had research come out, it's not that new now, but you know, the amygdala, like that part of your brain that responds like with emotional responses. They found that when people are learning new words, like that's the first thing that activates. And so what it means for learning is that like if you don't have a kind of emotional connection or a kind of meaningful connection to what you're learning, it's very, like your brain doesn't recognize it as something that you need to kind of hold on to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you need to recall it lots of times in different ways and different contexts to actually learn it for your long-term memory. So things like that I think we all know from our own experiences, but learning about those kind of things more deeply was really like, it's really good to have that huge bank of practical experience because you kind of see it in lots of different contexts.
Yeah. And
that was... that was something I really liked about teaching, and also something I think that helped me be able to do it for so long.
Yeah.
So it was kind of until about 5 years ago, I think, that I was teaching, and then I kind of went more into the curriculum writing for a couple reasons, because I still loved teaching, but when you're teaching, you often have to teach what is in front of you, and it's often like not great. And that really frustrated me. Yeah. So you're trying to give people a good learning experience with these like books that aren't helpful or don't have realistic language or don't have relevant skills for them when they go to university, or that aren't tailored enough to their experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up at RMIT training, where they had an in-house publisher and they published their own course books. And so I kind of was doing... I'd kind of split. I asked if I could do the role part-time and ended up getting a curriculum role part-time and keeping my other role part-time.
Oh, so just like a lot of things and like happening at the same time. And like even just the thing you were saying about the research stuff, like we're told this in trainings and stuff as well, right? Where like if you're sharing a story, if you're trying to explain an example, set a scene, like set something that people can actually relate to, especially when you're talking about tech. Like if you're trying to explain data visualization to somebody, like explain it in a story-based thing, because they won't remember it otherwise. And they're like, that makes so much more sense now. It's like, we know these days that it's just something like, unless you think about it very like specifically, it just doesn't work or doesn't make sense to me anyway outside of it. And, like that is very cool
100%.
But yeah, it goes so long, especially like trying to just explain different topics, and whether that's English or teaching or whatever else it is, or explain concepts of tech. kind of is something you can take away for everything. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
it's to remind myself.
It's such a gap in tech. Oh, the communication and the like documentation.
It hurts.
Is something,
like,
it really does, especially as a beginner. And that's something I talk a lot about when I'm talking to particularly like women or people entering the industry. I'm just like, it's not built for beginners, and it's to an extent not built for women as well, but that's another 10-hour podcast. But yeah,
that's days into it we can go. But so then the career switch is happening now. Like you've already kind of switched into something different. So where does the tech fit into it then? Like, like so many changes. I love it.
I actually had changed a little bit before that too. So I did this year where I was running like this learning center and ended up like building it up. I had like a little scheduling system and like they could come and sign like a little sign up sheet with the time slots so they could just book their time and come.
Yeah.
I had like a printing system because surprisingly, and this will never like cease to amaze me. We had, it was predominantly Chinese students by the time I was teaching. It used to be like Japanese and Korean, and now it's mainland Chinese. A lot of them, and they weren't all Chinese students, but a lot of the ones doing the printing were, and a lot of them couldn't print, and they'd be like in Microsoft Word, and like you'd be like, just go to print. So I would have like 10 students a day come up to me when I'm trying to like do my job and be like, can you come and help me like with the printer? I'm like, what is there to help with? Like just file, print, like there's no help needed. But it was also one of those kind of lessons where it's like, okay, like things aren't always clear to people. It's like UX really in tech. And well, I guess you'd call it CX because it's like in person.
Yeah.
But it was a really good lesson for me in like the things, you know, the things we think might be obvious aren't necessarily obvious, and information needs to be in a way people are going to access it and consume it. So like I'd put these signs on the walls that were like, had the screenshots. It's exactly like tech documentation actually. And was like, go to file, like screenshot. And I just was like, okay, good. Like now I can just be like, oh, have you seen the poster? Like go and look at the poster, then come back to me if you still need me. And they're like, never did. But yeah, so that was something I did they ended up asking me to do another year. So I did a couple of years in that role. And then when the curriculum role came up, I kind of negotiated if I could do it part-time. Yeah. And those two decisions were actually huge decisions for me at the time because I'd taught for a while, and it was like a kind of change in direction. And I was kind of like, oh, what if I kind of lose my teaching skills, or I don't know. It was something I really agonized over. Yeah. And I remember particularly for the curriculum writing role, it was a time when my manager in the learning center who ran the kind of library part, the books, he'd left after 12 years. And it was one of those jobs where you kind of are the only one that knows how to do it. It's not set up in a kind of sustainable way. So that's why they rotate it. Yeah. But at the time when he left, I'd been in it for like a year and a half, and they were like, please, like, can you not leave for like a little while? And I was like, okay. So I remember having the job application for the curriculum role. And this is a big life lesson for people who just don't know this, because I didn't know it. But what happens to me when I'm in interviews is I forget the question. Like, it happens to me in life. But I'll forget the question halfway through and then be like, what am I talking about? And like ramble and also not answer the question necessarily. Like, or I'll have to ask again, you know, what it was. So I was like, oh, what if I like wrote that down? And I had a friend who like takes in prepared notes. So he takes like a full clipboard of all the questions he thinks is going to be answered, full notes on answers and stories he wants to bring up. And he brings it in with him, and they ask him a question. He like goes, please give me a minute, and like flicks to the page. And I was like, that is a great idea. But I didn't want the prepared notes. I wanted to like be able to write it down. So, because I was like, I won't forget if I write it down. Yeah. And so I remember going into it, which is like, now it's like standard for me. I just like write everything down instantly, or I forget it.
Yeah.
But at the time I didn't know you could do that in interviews. I thought you just had to like sit in person. And you know, it was all in person then as well. Nothing was virtual really, or almost nothing. So I remember like taking in a notepad and being like, oh, do you mind if I take notes? And it was 3 people. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. And so they'd ask a question, I'd just be like, oh my God. And I'd like write down the keywords and write down, because they were asking really hard, like 3-part questions. I remember one was like, with a curriculum, what are the different types of curriculum and how does that impact how it gets delivered in the classroom? And it was like, they were really kind of long.
Yeah.
So that was really handy. And the feedback I got was like, oh, we were so impressed. Like you took notes. You looked like so serious. And I was like, yes. And so I got that job. And this is my second life lesson for people. It was full time and they insisted it was full time. And on the screen interview, like on the phone, which was by like an HR guy,
yeah,
he was like, and are you able to work full time? And I was like, no, because I need to stay in the learning centre for another 6 months. So I would be requesting to be 2 or 3 days a week, even though it said full time and they insisted.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, okay, I don't think that's really like going to be possible. And I was like, okay, that's okay. So I kind of thought I wouldn't even get an interview. And then I got an interview. And then on the call to offer the job, they were like, in the interview, yeah, they were like, oh, would you consider being part-time? As if it was like their idea. And I'm like, you said it wasn't. But so they'd obviously like had I don't know if they had other people have it or whatever.
Yeah.
But they ended up, giving me, I think 2 days and this other chick 3 days. And then I was in the learning centre 3 days.
Yeah.
So I was in this like, I had these kind of 2 transition points. And for that learning centre one, that was just like absolute agony for me because I was head of the learning centre by then. I'd gotten kind of promoted to look after all of it when my boss left. Yeah. I'd built it up. So it was like, had a lot of kind of systems working and we had a lot more workshops than before. We had a lot more teachers than before. So like we'd kind of negotiated to get more teachers the more students there were and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool job and I really loved kind of managing. But then curriculum was like where my kind of heart was. And I always loved writing good like learning materials because that's just, you can't, it's a real barrier as a teacher and a student. Like if your learning materials aren't good. And they wrote really awesome like course books that were really relevant and really engaging. So, and they were just about to do a rewrite of every level. I remember I went and asked people for advice whose opinions I valued. Yeah. So I'd asked the chick who had the role before me and said like, do you think it would be better for me to stay in the role or take a curriculum role? And I'd asked the director who'd kind of given me really good advice before. And I remember asking like the grounds guy, like the kind of, I don't even know what they're called, like building facilitator or something he was called. Mm-hmm. He was this kind of gruff guy who'd like kind of grumble around the university. He was just like, he was really interesting to talk to. He was like a movie character. I just loved him. And I was like, oh, Paul, can I ask your opinion? And he was just like, why are you asking me? Like, I don't have that experience because he'd been in like, kind of working class job his whole life.
Yeah.
And, but he gave me the opinion that like, not changed my mind, but made it really easy for me to make it, where he had said, the other one, there's a lot more kind of scope for different roles and variety and growth. Whereas in the managing one, which was like, I would have been much higher paid and I was in a much higher position in terms of like a career role. He was like, that one he's like, that's good, but it's not as kind of creative.
Yeah.
And so I remember that's how I made that decision. I had to kind of ask people that had different perspectives. I sometimes find it really hard in my head to make those decisions and it's like, really agonizing and I like really stressful. Because I was kind of, sorry.
I did that one like 2 months ago and I was like trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hi,
yeah, I saw it.
Can I just have chats with like 100 different, like I don't think there's like many people left in Melbourne that I probably didn't ask for an opinion on. It's just like,
was it helpful?
What do I do? Sorry?
Was it helpful though?
It was, like, as in, I think,
yeah.
And I think, sorry, just me saying I think constantly, but every person had a specific reason for why they would point to one thing over another, and it was just interesting, and it was really good because all of these people were for like different parts of my life, right? So there was Gretchen, who's kind of involved in like community stuff, and like she would be like really aware of the culture, where there's people from data and they were like involved with like the really job heavy side of things. So like it was a really good way to kind of get everything I value in a job or a role and everyone else's opinions on those different things. And I was like, okay, now I've gotten too many opinions and I just need to make up my mind.
Yeah, it's like an unbiased kind of pros and cons list instead of like your shitty one from your brain.
Exactly. And you're like, okay, cool, I see it now. This makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with my decision, whichever way it ends up. I'm like, it'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, hey, those moments. Like, oh, I still remember feeling it. But yeah.
It's not fun. But anyway, so we are doing curriculum development, and I think you moved, like, that's kind of all happening at the side end. So when did, I think, so you joined the boot camp? Like, how was that decision kind of along, and where did that come from?
Yeah, so that was, we're getting closer to there. With curriculum, that I did it for like, I think it was three or 4 years. But yeah, it was about 3 years. I got headhunted for a role in a kind of more senior role in Sydney. So I moved to Sydney. I think I mentioned this to you. This was back in 2018, so 3 years ago. And this is kind of what led to me coming to tech. I was in Sydney for 4 months. That's how long I lasted. I like moved my whole life there, and I was just like, no, like no to living not in Melbourne and no to being in this industry anymore. They were sexist. They were like very traditional and just terrible. It was the worst curriculum I've ever seen in my life. It was just like, I think about it and it like hurts my brain. They'd hired me and another woman who was also from the curriculum team in RMIT, because it's really niche what we did. So there's not many people in Australia that did it to that level. They hired both of us. She was my boss. And yeah, we were meant to rewrite their entire kind of curriculum at all levels. But they ended up, this is actually what happens in consulting too, but they ended up kind of going back on what they said just repeatedly. So we'd like she had like the rewrite plans when I got there already, and had rewritten all the units, had written like a structure for all the subject like areas that the content would be written inside. Because content-based curriculum, where you have like a theme that allows for those kind of opportunities for people to engage with like the words lots of times, which gives them those opportunities like to learn. Yeah, they kept going back on it, and they were also really kind of, I'm thinking of the word undermining, but it's something else, where they kind of like a bit gaslighty, really. Yeah. And sorry, I don't even mean that casually. I mean the real meaning of the term, like gaslighting. And it was such a toxic workplace. And I also had gotten to a point where I was just seeing this pattern in education. And so where I'd come from, I felt was like one of the best places in Australia for how they were writing their curriculum. Mm-hmm. But it was still an area that was getting like funding cut, resources cut. And I was just sick of it. I'm like, why these students are paying thousands of dollars to come here and like study, because it's, it's way more expensive for international students at uni. They work really hard, like not all of them, but like a lot of them do, and they're vulnerable. Like they're in a situation away from like support networks, and most of them are from cultures where you don't do that. Like you stay with your family for a long time. Yeah. And we're just putting them in these classrooms without the materials they need to succeed. And it just like, I was like, I'm not going to participate in this system anymore. Just like, it was just not okay with me. And so that was a real moment in my life where I kind of waited up and just felt like, because one of the other things that had come up for me was having job security, because I'd been casual for so long. When I got my first job in the learning centre, which was a 1-year contract, my mum was like, oh my God, you got like your first job, like your first like permanent job, because I'd never had one. Yeah. And like never had more than a short contract. So that was a really hard thing to walk away from for me. But yeah, I kind of waited up, and I'm like, I can't live anymore in conflict with my values to that extent. Yeah. So from then on, I've been really picky about the company I'm working for, the values they have and how they actually put them into practice. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I kind of left not only that job, but the industry. So I just was like, I am not willing to do this anymore. The system is like broken. It's not okay how we're treating like students. And yeah, I resigned, and I organised a woman actually I met at Girls in Tech, which was a global nonprofit I volunteered for before I was actually in tech myself. she'd headhunted me for a role back in Melbourne that was like a marketing role. And I was like, yeah, okay, like I'm not a marketer, but she's like, no, I would support you to do the marketing. You need to be more the delivery kind of project management, like delivery lead kind of thing.
Yep.
And that I was like, yeah, 100% can do that, the kind of organization side. And then she hired me 1 day a week, and that was a 4-day-a-week role. She hired me the other 1 day a week for her startup. I really loved their approach, and they would, do a lot of ideation, a lot of agile ways of working, and kind of help the clients learn how to be better like that as well. Mm-hmm. So that was really, really useful and really interesting, and a really great team, but also a really hard environment for me to work in and to succeed in, which is it was a big lesson to learn for me, because I felt like the way that it didn't let me show up in the way I wanted to. So like I look back on my work there and I don't feel good about it, and I didn't feel good about how I left as well, because that was so sorry, this is like my low point in my life that we go into now. So mid 2018, Gwenny's come back from Sydney to Melbourne, super pumped to be back in Melbourne. However, have walked away from a job that's like 100K a year at the top of my career and the like peak of my experience. So it was like my parents were like, what are you doing? And everyone I knew was like, are you fucking crazy? You know, it was like, and I couldn't promise that I did the right thing. You know, I didn't have the evidence. Now that industry has been demolished after COVID. So it's like my timing was like just so lucky for me. For the teachers I worked with, like a lot of them have been in those roles for like, 20 years and are having to figure out what to do. It's been very sad, like, to watch. And Australia's not supported the industry or the students very well either, which you'll see it's more in the news at the moment than it was before. It's been pretty awful. But yeah, at that time, what it looked like to me was that I was walking away from like a really lucrative like job, really high up. Yeah. And I was also like, presenting around like the place. I had like credibility, and I kind of was walking away from that. And so I went into this marketing job, and it was at this shop that is now closed because they didn't like make it. But they were also really sexist and like toxic. And I somehow kind of was in that. I recognized it quicker because I was like, oh, this isn't good. This is that same like vibe.
Yeah.
And they had like a lot of issues. Like the store was dirty. It was like dusty. Stuff was broken, and they were trying to improve their online like experience. But I'm like, you can't improve that and have people come into the shop and it be like rubbish. And they were like this 100-year-old family-owned company, so they had a lot of kind of credibility, and people would come there for the name. But really bad working environment. And so both of those roles that I was doing like at the same time, for essentially through the same company, but 4 days I was at this other company, but kind of managed by the startup. I working by myself, like without having someone to kind of bounce ideas off or review against, just doesn't work as well for me unless it's something with a really clear brief. And like I can look at, for example, a curriculum. I recently wrote like an open learning like micro credential for cloud computing. That kind of thing is a really short brief. It was like 6 modules. I know the topic area. I could immediately like in my mind plan out the curriculum, plan out what I wanted to do, and then write the kind of content. That kind of thing, that's like fine by myself. But I think it's because I've had so many years with other people learning how to do that myself. But it just doesn't work well for me. So like in both of those roles, I didn't have clear direction, and I didn't have someone to kind of work with. And I was like, I remember the manager, who's a really close friend, and who I really respect, of the startup. She would say stuff like, oh, no, you make the decision, like I trust you. Because she'd hired me to do like her learning content. But I'd be like, in my mind, I'm like, no, I want the direction from you. Like, it's your business, it's your course. And so I really struggled with that as well, without having kind of clear direction or vision from someone else.
Yeah.
And I ended up, this is spicy, ended up getting fired from the sexist place because I swore in a meeting. I said, this guy had, it's like hard to kind of summarize, but basically they'd had like weeks to do something, to give feedback and to give information in terms of we were collating like baseline data.
Yep.
I think this guy hadn't, and then had gone and talked to the manager or something. And then we're in this meeting and I was like, look, it was awful, like how he'd kind of behaved, and it meant, not mean, but it meant I couldn't do my job.
Yeah.
And I was like, look, you had, this time. I was like, that was pretty fucked. Like, this can't happen again. Are you willing to like communicate more next time? And then I think the next day I got this call like to come in at like 9 a.m. And I was like, okay, for what? So for anxious people, as you know, I'm sure everyone knows, or no, not everyone knows because it keeps happening. Do not say to people like, can I meet with you without an agenda, without telling them what they need to prepare? It's so stressful.
It's happened to me multiple times, and the amount of times I would write down like essentially angry emails back being like, you cannot do this. This is not okay. No one deserves the stress. Like, no. You know what you're going to talk about. Just talk, like, just write it down. It's not hard.
Yeah, it was brutal. And I asked, I was like, okay, so yeah, what can I prepare? Like, what do you need me to do? And he was like, oh, nothing. And I was like, oh, this doesn't feel right. And it was just, it was so humiliating and so, it was just awful. And they could only do it because I was on probation. Legally, you can't do that if someone is not on probation. It's totally acceptable. And there are like legal precedents like for people swearing, as long as it's not like that they're going to lose business because of it.
Yeah.
And like, I wasn't angry or like using a different tone or anything, like, anyway, but that crushed me. So I was just I was devastated. I like would have been really depressed. I was just like, I cried for just forever. I was so ashamed. I was so embarrassed to like tell my parents. But the flip side of that was I ended up being able to start the bootcamp earlier to do web development. So I already knew by then that I wanted to get into tech, partially because of the curriculum writing, because you have to use these online learning activities that like engineers have developed and they're rubbish.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm just going to learn how to do it myself. Like I just snapped one day and just started asking people I knew about, like, I'm like, what's HTML? Like, I remember to my ex, like, well, but what's JavaScript then? And like, just, or like, well, how does the internet work? Questions like that when you like don't know anything.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't even understand the concept of what a language was, like a programming language. I didn't know that that's how everything was kind of put together. And yeah, so I'd started like self-learning eventually when I figured out what it was. I ended up like teaching young girls to code with Code Like a Girl because they'd seen my teaching background. That started when I was in Sydney.
Yeah.
And yeah, I kind of knew I wanted to do it by then. And I was like, I can do this now. And I did the 6-month boot camp, which is like a diploma of IT. Still tried to, I wrote curriculum freelance around that to like pay, to be able to live. Like a lot of people went and like lived with their parents or their partners, but I kind of couldn't do that. So I burnt out basically. But I was like, it's 6 months, I can burn out and like, that's fine. Yeah. It like was not fine, but I got through the boot camp and here I am now. So
oh my god, there is so much in there that I'm like, gee, okay, wow, yes, I love. And I think it's just that conviction to be like, well, to start with like, I don't like this, I'm gonna build it myself. I love that, because I feel like 90% of people in tech have somehow ended up here just because I do not like this, let me just do it myself. Like genuinely, it's just like, I'm like, I could do this better.
Yeah.
Like, it really is true. And I think, and it's so important, I think, and I'm so glad you touched on it and you were happy to touch on it, about the other things happening outside. Like I said, the fact that you're like, well, okay, it's 6 months, I'll burn out, it's fine. It really isn't. Let's be real. It isn't.
Oh, God.
It's awful and it feels terrible. But, like,
oh, yeah,
that is the reality for so many people. Kind of make it, especially when you're doing a career change, like, it's not easy, and not easy having that faith, like that leap of faith without having like that safety net at the time. Because I mean, most people are doing that because they need a change and they don't have a safety net in the current place that they're in, because maybe it's a casual job or whatever else they're doing right now. I'm so glad you talked about it. Like, it's hard and it's tough, and if you can make, like, if you willingly will put yourself through it, like, it's great. You'll come out the other end of it, and it's a good life.
Yeah, super worth it.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
it's only been, I think, 2 years, and I'm already making more than I was in that job I left. So it's like, I can now be at that point where I look back and I'm like, oh, I can justify like my decisions.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole time, yeah, it is hard. It's hard emotionally. It's hard financially. It's hard like energetically to like be in that place of learning something new and kind of walking away from being an expert and becoming like, I was rubbish. I'm not a natural programmer. I'm not naturally like into tinkering with computers or like gaming or anything like that.
Yeah.
I learned pretty slowly. So it was just like, yeah, it was a really hard experience, and I like cried most of the time in class, like every day, just like by myself. Like no one saw. It was just like this secret, like little me. Actually, I wasn't even typing because I was staring at the screen crying because I couldn't understand it for like the 1000th time and just feeling like I was stupid. So like, yeah.
I'm so glad you talked. It's normal. Like coding isn't easy, and you touched on this earlier. Coding and like programming, it's not built for beginners. Like I don't know why it's been built to be so hard to get into it. I don't know what that whole barrierness is for, but it isn't easy.
Yeah, well, I think teaching is an undervalued skill, and a lot of people who are like either writing the content people learn from or the docs in tech, or teaching technical concepts, they don't necessarily have those skills or the support to develop those skills.
Yeah, and it's really sad, and I think it's just, it kind of goes back to just being very thankful you were openly talking about those things, because the amount, and I mean, I don't know if you would agree with this, but whenever I see people having changed careers from like boot camps or things like this, right, where they've had a career and they didn't go back to college to change it, they just kind of did a small little thing and then they moved. I think not enough people talk about the struggles around it. It's like, yep, I did this. It was great and I'm here and I'm succeeding and it's all good. And you'll be fine. You'll make it through and it'll be great on the other end of it. But I feel like no one actually talks about that middle bit, which is an awful time to go through because of the uncertainty. And you're like, well, I'm doing this. I don't know if it's going to work out. I've already left my other job. Yeah. God, yeah, I'm very glad you talked about this. This is great. Like, I really like this because, oh my God, yeah, I think there'll be like a couple of episodes in a row where it's like the different experiences of people going through boot camps, because the last episode was literally someone actually switching from pharmacy into doing tech through a boot camp, and again like teaching, and I think there's someone who has done a PhD in neuroscience. I'm hoping he'll come along too, so I'm like, that's cool. It's really interesting to hear the different experiences just within the same career changes. So thank you so much. I think we've talked for so long, so we might wrap it up there for today. And I feel like there's gonna have to be like I was saying this, so like there's gonna have to be follow-up episodes for everyone, just being like, this is where we were, this is where we're at now.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming along and sharing so openly and just being such a cool person to talk to. Like it always is. It's just so interesting to listen to you. And like,
my pleasure.
Figuring out all these other cool things you've done. Right. So we will wrap it up there, and we shall see everyone again in 2 weeks' time for another episode of Paths Uncovered.